Welcome everybody to tonight's topic of when someone approaches you about domestic abuse. My name is Rabbi Pinney Herman. My wife and I were shluchim in North Carolina. I was the Rav of Congregation Shari Israel in Raleigh, North Carolina for 30 years. And I now reside in Miami. Throughout this talk, you can ask questions either through the chat, which will identify who you are, or through the Q&A box, and that will be anonymous questions. Feel free to jump in that way. The event tonight is brought to the community by Ad, Crown Heights Jewish Community Council, Shalom Task Force, and the Association of Crown Heights Shuls, and Ohel Family Services. The event is part of a series of workshops and education that has been funded by a grant from the New York City Council's Domestic Violence Empowerment Initiative to Crown Heights Jewish Community Council on the recommendation of Council Member Matthew Eugene. Also want to take this opportunity to thank Mrs. Devorah Krasniansky of Ad for spearheading this project and all the other work that she does on behalf of the community in areas of shidduchim, marriage, and shalom bayis. There are many resources that you can find at www.adaad, that's ADAIAD.org. We'd also like to thank my dear friend, Rabbi Lazer Avtson of Association of Crown Heights Shuls for the encouragement and support of this project. This is the first of a number of topics in this first supporter series about shalom bayis issues. Upcoming topics will include how to respond when someone approaches you about betrayal, a spouse that has an addiction, a spouse with mental illness, internet use or pornography and related issues in marriage, and general shalom bayis issues. To sign up to hear about upcoming events, drop your email in the chat or the Q&A, and you'll be added to the list. Before we begin, I would like to just say a few words, just a quick Dvar Torah, and that is in the Rambam that we're learning now. It talks a lot about protecting people from danger. Today was about LCSW-R, about making a fence around your roof to prevent people from falling. And yesterday's Rambam, as I was learning, it really struck me that it was so fascinating that we're having this event tonight, talking about Arei Miklat, the cities of refuge. And to me, one of the most basic sichas of the Rebbe in Chelik Beis, talking about Arei Miklat and how there have to be signs up that point in the direction Miklat, this is the way to the city of refuge, and how the Rebbe explains it both in the literal level as well as the more esoteric level, and how each one of us has the obligation to be a sign that says Miklat, that this is the way to finding safety. There it's talking in spiritual matters, but certainly the same thing applies when it comes to matters of domestic abuse, and how it's not enough for us just to sit back and really wait for someone to come to us, I guess, like the title kind of says, but really to look at the things that we need to do in order to help others, to be proactive, and to truly create a haven for people that are in this very, very challenging and difficult situation. We are joined tonight by Yeshaya Kraus, who is a clinical social worker in Far Rockaway. He is director of Shalom Task Force's education department and works to expand both the scope and depth of community and school-based educational programming with a focus on healthy relationships and abuse awareness. He also runs a private practice in the Bayswater section of Far Rockaway, working with individuals, couples, and parents. Yeshaya, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Together with Yeshaya is Tzvi Wesson, who is the Assistant Director at Ohel Children's Home and Family Services. Tzvi is a psychotherapist in private practice, does counseling and therapy for families, couples, individuals, groups, and he uses a number of techniques and practices in that endeavor. So thank you, Tzvi. Thank you, Yeshaya, for being here and enlightening us. I was speaking to a woman who was in an abusive relationship. And she talked to me, she was just describing to me how most of the rabbis were not terribly helpful. Well, he's under stress or just trying, and always trying to make things work out. But they didn't really get what was going on. And there was one rabbi in particular who she credits with saving her life, who had just taken a domestic abuse workshop. And as soon as she described what was going on, he immediately recognized it, got her the help that she needed, and Baruch Hashem, she is in a much, much better place in her life today. And so that's really why it's so important for what we call first supporters. It's rabbis, rebbitzins, mashpiyim, teachers, Chosson teachers, Kallah teachers, to be on these workshops, to at least get an awareness. I mean, we're not expecting that these first supporters are going to solve the problems, but at least you'll have the verbiage, you'll have the vocabulary, you'll have the awareness to understand, to know what's happening, and then where you can find help and how you can help this person. And just as importantly, how you can help this person and how you cannot help this person. How, what things are within your purview and what things might be a little bit above your head, and you do need to refer them to someone with some expertise on the matter. And so I welcome, I'm so glad that all of you are here tonight. This is really, really vital. And I would say that really spread the word to those who are not here tonight, to let them know that we have these workshops, we have these seminars, webinars, and really it's an opportunity for people to educate themselves enough to at least be able to address the situation. So let's begin with, and this was something which I didn't even think about until we started planning for tonight. How do we define domestic abuse? What does that look like?
That is an excellent question. Thank you. First of all, thank you. I just want to echo the thanks and the honorable mentions that you put out there earlier to all the people who have been involved in bringing this to the community. As you said, this is a matter of really just vital importance. And I think that defining what domestic abuse is, both in general terms and in the specific terms, I think is a very important piece to being the difference between that one rabbi who was able to really save that girl's life and between being the other ones who really just don't know, just haven't learned about the nuances. There's a quote I heard, I forget exactly who said it. He says there are two types of community leaders. One is those who have worked with domestic violence and those who haven't noticed that they're working with domestic violence. It's unfortunately, it's part of the human experience, is that these kinds of dynamics do exist in relationships. With enough awareness and with a little bit of education, it can really make a difference in somebody's life. The way we tend to look at domestic violence as a broad definition is any relationship in which you have one partner, one spouse, who is exercising power and control over the other spouse. They're using some aspect of their individual lives. And you can think about it, there's so many different aspects to a person's individuality, to the life that a couple shares together. There's so many different parts of it where one of them might have a significant degree of power over the other one, which in and of itself is fine. It's normal. Different people are going to have different places where they shine and different abilities and different skills, and just different things that, you know, they happen to have more power over. The problem is where the person who's more powerful in any one of those aspects uses that power to control the other spouse, to intimidate the other spouse, to instill fear in the context of the relationship, and to really take away a sense of self-direction, take away the other person's ability to have a voice or to have an opinion due to the fear that they're experiencing. I think the one that maybe gets the most attention for obvious reasons is physical abuse, but truthfully, there are many other kinds of abuse as well. There's emotional abuse, there's financial abuse, there's digital abuse, which, like, maybe it sounds like something a little funny, but it's there. People can use technology these days to track people, to take over their bank accounts, to spy on people, stalking people, all sorts of different things that can be used to take away the other person's autonomy, the other person's ability to make decisions in a way which does not instill fear. Sexual abuse, religious abuse, spiritual abuse, like all of these different aspects of a person's life, all these important facets of a person's individuality are grounds for one person taking control and just using them to be in charge of the other person against their will. So that when we talk about domestic abuse, that's essentially what we're looking at. It's any relationship in which power is used to instill fear in the other person. Intimidation, fear, manipulation, whatever it may look like on a practical level.
There can be multiple. In other words, it may not be one, exclusive. There could be multiple forms, as you put it before, Yeshaya, of abuse, meaning there could be one or there could be many. The common denominator, as Yeshaya mentioned, is that level of control and that attempt to take that control.
Yeah. So it's very often there's an overlap.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it spills over into different aspects of their life together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess what you're saying is that unequal or inequity, in the balance is not necessarily it's something which can happen, but when it's weaponized, I guess would be, or when it's used to instill fear in the person and exert control over the person, that's when things really go south, and that's when we're dealing with real domestic abuse.
Yeah.
In all of its forms.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting way of putting it. This is a question that I get a lot when I talk to boys in high schools about these things. One question, I remember this one very specific, because the surprise on the boy's face when he asked the question was just so obvious. It's like, well, aren't men supposed to control the money? Which, the question in itself is like, okay, it's a loaded question. But the idea, so the discussion that we had, how we explained it, was that if there are going to be certain roles that men maybe traditionally take and certain roles that women traditionally take. And as long as both the man and the woman are honestly okay with that, that's fine. That's not a matter of a power imbalance. That's not a matter of using the power that he has over the finances to control his wife, because she knows if she wanted to have more say in the finances, she could say something about it. And she's honestly okay with him having the degree of control that he has. It becomes a problem when she's not okay with it and can't say anything because she's afraid. So that's where the power imbalance becomes a real problem.
And often, I think, my wife and I work with couples, and there are times where it does seem that women can sometimes really get stuck in a marriage. They have 5-6 kids. They have no real means to support themselves. They can't just go to their parents' home. Their parents can't absorb a family of, a daughter with 5, 6, 7 kids, and they're just sort of stuck. And so sometimes I think in certain, from communities especially, it almost lends itself for that potential to occur.
I would say it's definitely, there are definitely a lot more factors, or let me rephrase that. There are definitely different factors, I think, in the frum community that could theoretically lead to difficulty for an abuse victim or for somebody who's going through an abusive relationship, either leaving or even if they decide they don't want to leave, but being able to navigate it effectively. There are tons of different details. One you mentioned was like, the idea of like what kind of support, which is essentially what that case boils down to. What kind of support does this person have beyond her immediate situation? And I think that ultimately the goal, or one of the goals of events like this, is to make it so that there are more resources and there's more of an awareness of how we as members of the community, forget about as professionals, forget about as rabbis, but we as members of the community, what we can do to bring awareness to this particular issue. Because honestly, the more awareness there is, like, think about it. Let's go back to this woman who's got 5 kids and is concerned about her safety in the marriage, which is really what it all boils down to. It's the concept of safety. What it boils down to is, what resources does she really have? Like, if her only resource is her parents, and her parents are not equipped to, as you say, absorb a family, an extra 7 people around the dinner table, which quite honestly makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, what resources can the community at large provide? What resources are available beyond the scope of the immediate family? And I think the more people learn about these issues, the more people think about them, the more likely it is that additional resources will be either developed or pop up, or people just get involved and be able to give some sort of support, which currently is maybe not as available.
Right. And going back to, our preparing as well, the idea of stigma, I think that these conversations, that's our goal. Our goal is to combat that stigma, to be able to open the door to conversation, to be able to help individuals, I want to say confront, that's the wrong terminology, but to be able to communicate their fears. And I think in some level, the fears, when I was driving home today, I was thinking about the reactions that many times we have when we're faced with trauma. When people come to us and share a traumatic event that they've gone through, our first instinct is generally to try to alleviate that trauma, and we see it through our eyes. We look through the trauma and we see it as individuals who are concerned about that trauma itself. So hearing it and is difficult for us, and our first route is really to try to repair whatever the damage is, when in the moment it goes to the point of being present and listening, which I know I might be jumping ahead a little bit.
No, but I look, I think getting people to listen is, because we're always looking to answer, and getting people to listen is so vital in this line of work, or really in almost any line of work, to really be able to listen and really be able to hear what the person is saying. And sometimes that's what they want. They just want someone to listen to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially in situations of abuse, where very often the experience that the person is going through is so isolating. And very often, it's like, we can talk a little bit about what abusers look like, and what people who go through abuse looks like. And the thing that you notice a lot of times is that very often abusers are not the schlepper. They're not the person who's looked down on the community. They're not the horrible person who everyone avoids. Very often, the ones who are the abusers are very charismatic. They're well liked within the community. They're respected. And the victim goes through life thinking to themselves, there's no way I can come out about this. There's no way I can say anything about this, because who's going to believe me? Who's going to believe me? This is my husband, the Rebbe. This is my wife, the Mechaneches. This is my spouse is a respected individual on all sides, and it's going to be basically me against the word and the impression of the entire community. So I can't come out with that. So the idea of just having somebody to sit with the person and really hold space for them to be able to tell their story and to take their story seriously, to really not try second guessing, to not judge, to not say like, okay, well, maybe he meant this, maybe he meant this, which actually goes back to what that story that you started off with. We have we have many people who they'll hear about Shalom bias stories, and it's like, okay, well, let's try to fix it up. Let's make it better. Must be this is what happened. Let's assume that that this is what he meant. This is what she meant. If you just do this, this, and this, and it'll all be good by dinner time, and you can go to bed happy. Which I think in general, Shalom bias cases. I mean, you know this well as well. In general, Shalom bias cases, this is often not how it works, but certainly in cases where there's abuse, it just reinforces the experience of being abused, because now it's not just the spouse which is abusing, now it's the community which, in a way, is reinforcing that abuse by second guessing the abused victim, the victim's impressions, second guessing their experiences, saying, "Oh, I didn't really mean that," and going on like that. So that aspect of really being able to listen, really being able to hold that kind of space for the person who's finally has the courage to come and open up about something that's going on is tremendously important to be able to allow any progress, any healing to take place.
I think you're honing in on a very important point. Multiple points, actually, for that matter, because you're touching upon that fear that you talked about before about not being believed. I think it's a massive fear of finally having the courage to step forward and talk about a secret that has been kept for so long, not being able to be heard and believed in what's being shared. It could be a secondary trauma, quite frankly. I'm just going to say it as is. It could be a secondary trauma. And, we using terminology that, has often been used in the past, feeling gaslit or feeling like there's gaslighting. Right. Like, it can't have been that severe. Maybe you're mistaken. All that terminology takes the person away and once again brings them back into that abuse.
Right. And I think part of it also is that we project. I think that naturally we project ourselves into a situation, and God willing, we're not abusers, so we just assume that person isn't really an abuser and something was misunderstood. And again, this is all done with the best of intentions, but at the end of the day, it just further it just creates a further oppression on the person who's experiencing this domestic abuse.
Right.
So I guess the next question I'd like to ask you, following this discussion, is, so how does this really come to the rabbi, the rebbitzin, the mashpia, the teacher? How does it come to their attention? Because I'm guessing that, like you were saying, that this is something that's, like Dr. Twersky, Alav Shalom, his book on domestic abuse, Shame Born in Silence. Everybody knows that, Jewish, in frum families, there's never domestic abuse. I mean, that doesn't happen. Just like there's no alcoholism or no drug abuse or anything else, right? Everything is perfect. It's been swept under the carpet. It's been hidden for so long. Finally, people are willing to start to shed some light on it. But still, like I think, as you mentioned before, Tzvi, it's hard for somebody to step forward. And a lot of times they're not going to. And so it's almost incumbent upon the first supporter to actually approach the person, I would think.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? How do you do that? What are the words you use?
So I think that there are a couple of different pieces to that particular question. And I think it's a great question. I think because it really does speak to so many different stages in forming a relationship with people. If you think about it, when a person does go over to someone else about something difficult, forget about abuse for a second. It's like I was a bacher in yeshiva once, and every bacher in yeshiva has their stuff that they want to discuss with someone, and you figure out like who's the person you trust. Who's the person you trust? Who's the person that you think can hold this for you or can help you hold this? So I think before we even start talking about abuse and noticing signs and approaching people, you want to make sure that whatever your role is, and I know that we have we advertise this for a lot of different people in a lot of different roles. Whatever your role is, whether it's a Rav, whether it's a Mashpia, Kallah teacher, Chosson teacher, a mentor, or honestly, even a concerned friend, being able to establish a relationship in which being non-judgmental has top billing, being non-judgmental, being kind, being compassionate, and being able to just take a person seriously in general, especially in these roles where you're in community leadership. I think that's the first step, really, before even questions of abuse even come up, to really be able to figure out how best to do that with the individuals that are, I guess, for lack of a better term, your constituents, if you want to call them that. So that's really the first step. The second step, I think, is really and this, I think, comes about as a result of being able to form that kind of relationship, is noticing the signs, noticing the mood, noticing the feelings. I mean, as I said before, physical abuse maybe is the most obvious one. That's really how Shalom Task Force got started. There was a pediatrician in the 5 towns who noticed people coming to his practice with bruises that just didn't make sense. He did some digging, he figured it out. That's where this whole thing came from. But really paying attention to the signs, whether they're physical signs, whether they're emotional signs, changes in behavior, changes in who the person hangs out with, isolation. And, a lot of these things maybe are indicators of, potentially indicators of other mental health issues as well. Like you can see that somebody is, I don't know, not coming to shul anywhere near as often as they used to. And it could be fine, and it could be depression, and it could be something else. But noticing those signs, noticing the changes in behavior is an important step to being able to pick these things up. If you're seeing a couple dynamic, let's say you're seeing a couple together, like whether it's I don't know, by a kiddush or by a community function or by a Shabbos Suda or something like that. If you're seeing them by a community function, then you may notice just the atmosphere between them. Is there an atmosphere of respect? Is there an atmosphere of trust and safety? And sometimes you can tell, if a person feels safe with someone else, not even necessarily by anything overt that they're doing or saying, but just the body language, the way they talk, the way they react to each other. You can kind of see it. And very often you'll get like a gut feeling, like, okay, gut feeling could be a good thing. Like, okay, this is really nice. Or you could get a gut feeling also, which is like, there's something that's just a little off here. You may not be able to put your finger on it, but it's something that should kind of like pick up your antennas and start getting you to think along those lines. Okay, what exactly am I seeing? What exactly am I looking at? And as you start to kind of identify it a little more clearly, what's my role here? You asked about specific language to use when approaching someone. One way to say it, to make sure that you have you're in a space which is safe, where if you're concerned about the spouse being an abusive spouse, you don't want to do this in front of the abusive spouse. But to go over to the person that you're concerned about and say, listen, I've noticed a couple of things, I'm kind of worried. If you want to talk, or if there's something that you would like help with, I'm here for you. I'm here to help. I'm here to be supportive. And what that does is it gives them the message that you're on their side. You want to be of service. You want to be of help and support to them. It also doesn't put them on the spot. Like if I go over to somebody and say, I noticed that this and this is, I saw A, B, and C. Is something happening? That like puts them on the spot right there. It's going over and saying, I'm here if you want to talk to me. You don't have to feel pressure to say anything right now, but if you want to talk, if something's going on, then I'm here for you. that in itself can just kind of open up those bridges. Quite honestly, they might not even cross the bridge once you build it. It might take a while for them to build that bridge. And there's a lot going on in a victim's mind. There's a lot of different cheshbonos that they're making about what's going on, what their options are, what should they do, and there's a lot going on. So this is kind of just another thing that you're putting in there to think about, and whether or not a person will take you up on it. If something is in fact going on, it's up to them, and it may take some time.
If I can add a little bit to Yeshaya, what you're saying, family as well, one distancing themselves from family, that I think is something that would be coming in, a sudden distance from the family, or a family member feeling that their relative is being pulled away. That's something that could also be a factor or symptom. Again, Yeshaya, I agree with you 100%. These are general concepts to be aware of with anybody, to be present and be open-minded to anything that might be going on, and using that to be able to open the door to communication.
Right. I guess I guess one of the issues is that sometimes it could just be the way people are wired. In other words, you might see one spouse is monopolizing the conversation more than the other. It might be because one's an extrovert, one's an introvert, or it might be because of domestic abuse. And so I guess, again, for tonight, this is to raise awareness of what the possibilities are and of being aware of it. But not every time that you see XYZ doesn't mean that that there is abuse going on. But at least you begin to notice a little bit more. You become a little bit more aware. I mean, I just think back over my 30 years in North Carolina as a Rav there, and yeah, I mean, since we've been speaking about this. Yeah, I missed some. I definitely missed some signs and some people that where maybe I could have done something. And I mean, I think we're leaders in the community. It's awkward to go to somebody. What if, and then you think to yourself, well, what if there isn't any abuse going on and now I'm raising something and now, they're going to think I'm suspicious of them and that's going to mess up the relationship. And, so there's so many things that we can sort of build up in our own head of, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't say anything and just sort of let things go. What do you think about? Like, what do you do with that?
So,
yeah. Go ahead.
So going back to something Yeshaya said before, going over to somebody and saying to them, just want to let you know that if you need anything, I'm here for you. If you ever need to talk, just having that opening, going back to that, having that opening to be able to have somebody to talk to, being present, offering them that opportunity, I think is it's imperative in regard to being able to support everybody and anybody, but all the more so those who are going through trauma.
Sure.
Yeshaya, I interrupted you.
No, we're good. We're good.
And I guess, I mean, if it's a little bit more overt, maybe you can say something a little bit more like, I kind of know something's going on, like, are you okay? Or are you safe? Or something like that. Again, that if you're not sure, that could open up a real, it could create a lot of distance between you and the family if it's not really the case. But, but it could also save a person's life. And so there's no one answer and there's no one formula, but I mean, I guess these are just things at least to start thinking about and to start, get that percolating a little bit and at least start the process.
Yeah. People will, once they have that opening, I'll tell you, there was a story that was, I heard when I first came into Shalom Task Force. There was a woman who called in the hotline, and she we have our anonymous hotline, which we'll talk a little bit about later, where people can call in with their concerns about relationships and just get some emotional support, maybe some referrals to different services. And she said she had clipped the ad that she saw for our hotline, I think 5 years prior, and had been carrying it around in her wallet for 5 years. You know, people who have a need and just aren't ready to follow up on it yet, it's important to at least present to them how they can have those needs met. So the idea of, you know, whether it's something more vague and saying, I noticed something's going on and I'm here if you want to talk about it, or if you need help with it, which opens the door to them. Or even if you're seeing specific things like, you know, one spouse consistently publicly disrespecting the other spouse, going over and saying, I saw what happened. You don't deserve that. You know, you deserve to be respected. If you need help with something around this, let me know. I'm here to talk if you want to. You know, you can call out what you're seeing without interpreting it. I think that's also an important part of it. It's a technique with parenting, ironically, but the idea of saying exactly what you're seeing before interpreting it, just to kind of put out, this is what I'm seeing, this is what we're dealing with, this may be how I perceive it, but this is what we're dealing with. So when you're talking to somebody who's a potential victim, saying this is exactly what I'm seeing and not putting in any interpretations, that in itself can kind of give them a pesach to talk about whatever it is that's going on, because they see that you're being non-judgmental. They see that you're not interpreting things. You're just kind of calling it like it is, as if you're a video camera almost, and saying, if you want to talk, I'm here to support you. I'm here to help. You deserve the help. Let me know if and when you would like to take me up on it.
Okay. That makes sense. I mean, that's yeah. I can see that. I can see that. It seems like we're living in a world now, even in the frum world, where abuse is less secretive than it was. It's things are coming out in the open. I mean, and we're trying to find the words to talk to our kids about protecting their bodies and things like that. And so, you know, we need to do the same thing when it comes to domestic abuse as well. And something which we talked about in preparation for tonight, that I just wanted to mention, and you certainly love for both of you to expound upon it, is that domestic abuse, we generally think of the husband being the abuser and the wife being the abused, but that's not always the case.
So yeah, it's not always the case. Research shows, and I'm just going to quote the research from the CDC just for the sake of having a number to latch onto. You know, we can poke holes in the research all we want, but research from the CDC, I think, says 1 out of 4 women will experience a physically violent relationship over the course of their lifetime, and 1 in 7 men. So you know, you can poke holes in it by saying, well, okay, the research was done on a sample of people who maybe have more than 1 relationship over the course of their life, or more than 2 or 3 relationships over the course of their life, whatever it is. You know, you can say that it's specifically talking about physical violence, but when you, and not to belittle any of that, but if you look at it, fact is, what those numbers show is that part of the human condition, part of the human experience is that there may end up being abuse. You know, if from the research that they're showing, 1 out of 4 and 1 out of 7 for physical violence specifically, then you add in all these other different types of abuse, whether it's emotional, psychological, sexual, financial, all of these different things. It's there. It's an issue. It's certainly not just a Jewish issue. Certainly not just a secular issue. It's a human issue. You know, it's like we're humans first, and then we're Yidden on top of that. But we still have to deal with the human part. And unfortunately, this is a part of that experience. You know, so it's out there. It's something which is relatively common. I'm not going to say relatively common, but it's definitely something which pops up, you know, quite a lot.
Right. All right, I see in the chat, please address when a couple comes about shalom bias and you think it might be abuse, what to do and what not to do. And I think going maybe into a larger kind of question, or what are some of the mistakes, let's say your top 3, 4, 5 mistakes that a first supporter makes or is prone to make when dealing with some of this?
I think Yeshaya and I are gonna agree to all 5. So
Okay.
I think we're gonna be on the same page. So
Okay.
definitely
You want to
couples.
start?
Yeah, I'll do the first, and if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
A referral for couples therapy.
Mm-hmm. Ding, ding, ding. There we go.
I think that's probably one of the top ones.
Mm-hmm.
So does
Yes.
that mean that once you've determined or once you see that there's domestic abuse, it's basically, okay, again, I know there's so many different, types of abuse, but let's start with physical abuse. If there is one episode, does that mean it's time to leave? It's time to divorce? Get out now because the person's incorrigible, and there's and that is what the Rav, the mentor, the Rebbitzin, that's what they should be advising. Get out while you can.
No. So the way we look at it is that what we want for the relationship is that both people should feel safe. So if one episode of physical abuse is going to make one of them feel unsafe, then it has to be addressed as potentially an abusive relationship. But as we said, when we were talking about what domestic abuse is, what we're really looking for is a pattern of power and control. If there's a pattern of power and control, even if the physical abuse has only come in once, there are going to be examples in other aspects of the relationship where that power and control is evident. And it could be that this one physical altercation is maybe the final straw, which kind of made the person re-examine the entire relationship and think about like, okay, is this really an abusive relationship or not? But if there is that, it's very rarely, I'm not going to say never just because I don't like making blanket statements, but it's not something that's going to happen in a vacuum. If the physical violence was something that happened as a result of somebody trying to take power and control, of trying to intimidate and trying to instill fear, it's going to have happened in other aspects of the relationship also, which maybe are physical and maybe are not necessarily looked at as the stereotypical physical violence. Like if you look at the different pieces that we spoke about, there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap. Whether it's sexual violence, which has a physical component to it. The threats of violence, like maybe somebody never actually hit, but if there were threats of violence, then that's something there's something to be looked at there as well. So the first episode of physical abuse is, I would be very surprised if that was the only incident on an otherwise spotless marriage.
All right, okay, thank you. Let's get back to mistake number 1. So referral for couples therapy is a horrible idea. Why?
So part of a couple of reasons. I mean, a lot of what happens in couples therapy is that you're trying to help both members of the couple open up to each other and reconnect to each other at a more vulnerable place than where they have been connecting. And you think about it, very often you'll have a nominally healthy marriage, but there are arguments. Conflict is a part of marriage. It's normal, which I think that's a whole other discussion, that we have to normalize the idea of conflict in marriage too. But conflict is a part of marriage. And what happens in conflict is that you have people whose maybe their expectations or their emotional needs are not being met, and they're reaching out for each other through the conflict. We have one person who's trying to connect through the conflict, and the other person is reacting to that attempt to connect with conflict. And it doesn't go all that well usually, because fighting is not fun. It's just not something that works particularly well, but it's kind of how we're wired. It's kind of how we do things. So the point of couples therapy, regardless, I think, of which modality you're going to look at it through, is to find a deeper point for them to connect and to really share the emotional needs that they may have. Where you have one who's an abuser and whose whole MO is manipulation and intimidation and control, then the abused spouse opening up is basically just giving him more ammunition. It's basically giving him, the other person, just more to deal with, more to work with. So now, before, I could manipulate you on the surface level of the onion. Now I can manipulate you on a much deeper level. I can go inside and I can really get into the kishkas of what makes you tick, which is a horrifying prospect.
While introducing someone who could help validate that. So I have the therapist now who's wondering what's going on here. And bear in mind, the abused it's difficult to share the abuse, even with a therapist, because trust is a major issue. Bear in mind that trust has been lost. They've had an intimate partner that has taken that trust from them. So here they are sitting down, and the difficulty in sharing the abuse, even with the therapist in that moment, when there's an alliance, or maybe perceived to be an alliance between the therapist and the abuser, the fear only is exacerbated.
Right, and somebody mentioned here in the chat, when they're coming for Shalom Bayis, they can't, the abused cannot really say anything because the abuser is right there. So, having a forum to be able to have, and with this woman that I mentioned at the beginning of the program tonight, I mean, the rabbi actually spoke to her privately, spoke to him privately, in addition to speaking to them together, and was able to get a bigger picture. Let's continue now. So next mistake.
Next mistake is, first of all, it's not having conversations individually. I think that's a mistake that very often comes up. I think it's not just with Rabbanim either, but not giving each person the space to tell their own story and really accepting and acknowledging their experience as they're presenting it. I think that's a major error that people make. Okay, I'm about to get up on a soapbox here, but I guess we can.
Not too long though, because we still have a few more mistakes to cover and a couple other questions.
Yeah. I think another mistake that people often make when they're trying to work with couples in general is encouraging the concept of vitor, encouraging somebody to be mevater in a situation where it's not warranted or where it's not safe. It's the whole. Can I say a part? Can I say a part?
Sure.
I'm not wearing the right hat for this, but so I saw this amazing shot in the word shalom, and it appears on the siddur. It says achris l'shalom. So he says that the concept, it says Hashem created shalom uvareis hakol. Hashem made shalom and then created everything. Why? Why does it have to be in that order specifically? Because Hashem used the four basic elements to be able to create the world, right? There's Eish, Mayim, etc. Right. Yeah. So in order to be able to use Eish and Mayim together, so things which are diametrically, they're naturally contrasting, they can't exist in the same space. Hashem had to create Shalom. Shalom is the ability for two contradicting entities to coexist. So Isa Shalom, Hashem created that concept. And then once he created that concept of two contrasting entities to be able to exist, he was able to create the world with those things. So if you plug that into Shalom Bayis, it doesn't say, it's the same idea. You have a man and a woman who are two very different people, different backgrounds, different sets of ideas and thoughts and needs and wants and all that, and putting them together. The idea of Shalom Bayis is to be able to take those two contrasting things and coexist. Doesn't mean to wipe one off the map. It means to coexist. The concept and I'm not saying that being mevater has no place. It certainly does, but it has to be real, honest vitor. The idea of saying, you know what, this honestly does not matter to me. And I'm okay with giving it up because it honestly does not matter. But if it's something that does matter and we're encouraging vitor, then best case scenario is that it breeds resentment. Worst case scenario, like in a case where you have one person with abusive tendencies and you have another person who's been experiencing abuse in the relationship, constantly being mevater is just another example of the community saying, it's okay, you can give it up. It's not important for you to feel safe. It's not important for you to have a healthy and fulfilling relationship. And I think that a lot of times people tend to err on the side of being mevater to things because they're afraid of difficult conversations. And I think that that's another thing we have to kind of reinforce in marriages today, that difficult conversations are by nature difficult. And being mevater in order to get out of a difficult but important conversation is not ideal. It's definitely not ideal. And certainly in situations where we're talking about abuse, encouraging being mevater just kind of feeds it.
Right. And again, it's negating that person even more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are there any other big mistakes that you'd like to just mention briefly? Tzvi, Shaya, either one. Those cover those are the big ones.
I think
also,
yeah. Go ahead.
I think sometimes external conversations outside, instead of taking the direct route, sometimes can have an adverse effect depending on the situation.
What do you mean by that?
Sometimes speaking to the wrong, forgive the terminology, the wrong individual, we end up observing something, and we decide it might be better to get an external individual to clarify if what we're seeing is reality or is what is actually happening, and inadvertently it goes back to the source of the abuse. So that could be, dangerous. Having conversations, we're going to hopefully touch a little bit. I know we have a little bit of time, but I think it's important for us to touch on the safety aspect, the safety of the individual, which I think that this may play into that. This may move us in that direction.
Right.
Sometimes, right.
Yeah, talk about the safety issue. Talk about that more.
Yeah, so I think that what you're saying about the external conversation, that's a very good point. What happens when an abuser feels that he's losing the control that he has is that he will intensify his attempts to maintain that control. Things are going to accelerate. The control is going to get worse, whatever aspect it is. It's going to get worse. He may expand his repertoire of doing whatever it is he's doing. He may add on to it. But it's important to have, first of all, as Tzvi mentioned, the idea of assuring confidentiality and of making sure that things don't get back to anybody that they're not supposed to get back to. It's a real problem. And especially like in a community, like where people are all connected and people talk and people handle, people overhear, it's important to be able to have like a framework of how to discuss these things safely with people who need that safety. And to be able to make sure that the person who you're working with, who's approached you or who you've approached, is getting access to the places that they can actually have a safe plan. A plan for exactly what they want to do, exactly how they want to approach the situation, whether it's a matter of knowing how to stay safely in their home, which often is the case. As we said before, there are many different factors which make leaving very difficult. Or maybe the person just doesn't want to leave for whatever reason, and those reasons are completely valid. but being able to make a plan, getting the person to be able to access whatever services they can, to be able to make a plan to stay where they are safely, or if they decide that they want to leave, to be able to do that safely as well. I don't remember exactly what the statistics are, but research has shown that abusers become more dangerous after their victims leave. After their victims leave the home, more damage is done to victims after they leave the home than is done while they're staying here. And it's all part of the escalation. As we said, like when an abuser feels comfortable with the status quo, then the abuse is going to maintain whatever the status quo is. There are certain patterns, maybe there are certain ways that that he goes about doing what he's doing, and it's obviously it's not comfortable. It's not a good situation to be in, but by and large, it'll maintain itself. You know, it'll pretty much stick around. When the abuser gets a hint that things are changing, when something's happening to disrupt the status quo, the abuser intensifies efforts to maintain whatever control he or she has. And when the person leaves, which is a real threat to the control that the abuser has, that's when things really go off the rails, like completely off the rails. You know, again, I don't remember exactly what the research is, what the numbers are, but after leaving is the dangerous part. So that's where there has to be a real safety plan involved. And I think also it should be reiterated at this point, and can't be emphasized enough, that people don't need to feel like they need to fix everything. You know, a Rav can be there as a supporter. A Rav can be there as somebody who can hold a person's hands through whatever path they need to navigate. But they shouldn't feel that it's their responsibility or their role to fix everything. You know, it's like it's the line I've used with high school students, which I think is very true with, I think, anybody who's not a therapist or involved in a DV organization that specializes in these things, is that it really is very much above your pay grade to fix this kind of solution. It really is. And like, it's not fair to the person who's looking for help to put yourself under that kind of pressure to say that it is. It's not fair to yourself, certainly. And it's just important to really be able to know what you're capable of, know what your role is, and to play that role as best you can without stepping beyond that, because that's how things can get out of whack a little bit.
Yeshaya, I just want to add something. I just realized as you were speaking, I think there's also the factor of what happens after, if the person chooses or when they choose to leave. Many times you touched upon community, and many times what I know we collectively have seen happen is after the person leaves, it could be, you know, rabbis or community members are contacted, and there's a level of involvement with not understanding the dynamics of the situation. So I think it's always important to go back to step one as we started, that being that active, as we therapists call it, active listening, and understanding that there may be more than meets the eye involved before we go down that place of, and forgive this term as well, judgment.
Right. You know, so, one of the other things that this woman was telling me is that, you know, women may go to a Rav and say, I really feel like I need to go on birth control. You know, right after the wedding, she wants to go on birth control. I don't know if I can be a good mother or whatever it is. But no, you'll be fine. You'll be a good. Maybe, again, it doesn't happen. It's not always the case, but there might be, again, you got to be able to sort of understand what's going on beneath the surface. And maybe what she's saying is, I'm not ready to have a kid, you know, with this man, because I'm not sure I can stick around, or I'm not sure this is a safe place to raise a child. And so, again, it's again being able to read between the lines. And what the person is saying, instead of just having, well, we don't do it, or we do it, or only 6 months, or come back to me in a week, or whatever, you know, whatever the, you know, the typical answer is.
So my answer to your question is a question, Rabbi, tell me more. Tell me more. Meaning you mentioned before the woman who's questioning, going, tell me more. I'm listening. Tell me more.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
And
another
again,
old
and that
quote.
creates the safety, and that creates the that opens the door for her to, you begin to explain what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
another old quote that I remember hearing is, most of the story is written between the lines.
Yes, very true. Very true. I was wondering also, I mean, I know, okay, we're at the hour mark, but I think we could do at least another 10, 15 minutes if you're game.
Sure.
I'd like, we being a rabbi, I'm more prone to that, but I'm really thinking about Chosson teachers, Kallah teachers, or you know, when they're giving classes, things like that. What do you say? What don't you say? Another thing this woman had mentioned to me is that at some point she said something to somebody, and they said something that goes on in what was going on in her relationship, and that person said to her, "That is not normal." She said, "Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that that's not normal." And in our community, how are they going to know what's normal? I mean, they see their parents, but only to a certain extent. Certainly, what goes on behind closed doors, they have no idea. And so they have no idea what normal is or is not. And they think, well, if I only, you know, cooked a little better or cleaned a little better, or, you know, you said if I only made a little more money or whatever, you know, that everything would be fine, without realizing that this is not normal. So be a Chosson or Kallah teacher right now. What are you saying to them?
So I think two things that I think are important. And specifically, I think in the realm of Chosson and Kallah teacher, because Chosson and Kallah teachers really are, because of the nature of their relationship, you know, you're most of the time, Chosson and Kallah teacher are the first form of any sexual education that these people are getting, certainly with a healthy dose of hashkafa thrown in. So by nature, if you're doing it right, the relationship that a Chosson or Kallah teacher has with their student is one which is more open than other teachers might be. It's more open because you're used to talking about these more sensitive topics, these things which maybe are normally looked at as something which is not going to be spoken about. So the first thing, so being able to leverage that kind of a relationship and planting the seeds early on, you know, when people first start taking classes with them, you know, it is the idea of making that relationship one where the teachers, it makes it very clear, if something goes wrong or if you feel that something is off, tell me. I want to help you get through it. Many things, and this is also beyond the realm of abuse. Many things in relationships, people have a real, they're very ambivalent to reach out for any help because it's such a deeply personal issue, and because there's this isolating feeling of like, I'm the only one who this happened to. It's so embarrassing. It's not something that I can talk about. But putting that out there as a Chosson or Kallah teacher, saying this is whatever it is that you're concerned about, odds are it's not something that's only happened to you. Odds are it's something that I can help guide you to get some sort of support on. That, I think, is a seed that Chosson and Kallah teachers need to plant early, which leads me to the second point, which is that I think in general in relationships, and this really starts before we get to the Chosson Kallah teacher stage, but people have to learn to trust their feelings. People have to learn to trust that things are that our bodies are wired. We're designed to pick up on danger signs. We are. It's just the way Hashem designed the nervous system. The way Hashem designed our bodies is that we pick up on things which are perceived as dangerous, and we have physical reactions to them. We have to teach people to trust their gut with not just, you know, let's say there's a wild elephant running down the street. Yes, we will trust our gut when there's a wild elephant, but we should also trust our gut when we're going out with somebody who really doesn't sit well with us, or when or when our fiance says something which really is worrying. People have to learn to trust their gut and be aware of it, and not just to brush it under the rug, but to acknowledge the feeling, to honor the feeling, and to understand that these feelings are here for a reason. They're meant for us to acknowledge and be aware of and interpret in some way with somebody who we trust. So I think that that's something that Chosson and Kallah teachers should be strongly reinforcing, the idea of trusting your gut. And the other thing I think that should be reinforced is the concept of consent. I'm not just talking about in terms of sexuality, I'm talking about in terms of any area of the relationship which requires interaction, because certain things, maybe, I guess I'm not going to ask for consent to make a certain thing for supper necessarily, but the idea of consent, the concept of consent being something which is a foundation of a healthy relationship, I think is so important. Because if I'm thinking of consent, okay, is my wife okay with this? Is this something that she's really okay with? Not, is she just being mevater to just kind of like, okay, let's move on with life. That's how you create a good and healthy relationship. And if both sides are practicing that, that's where a healthy relationship comes from. If you have one side that's practicing that and seeing that the other side is not, that's something to be concerned about. It's something to be addressed. It's something to talk about. And again, all these different indicators that we're talking about, they're not always signs, as we said before, they're not always signs of abusive relationships or abusive tendencies. They could be theoretically a matter of a lack of education, but it's something to be aware of, something to be honored, and something to be looked at and explored properly by people who know their way around these things.
Right. Tzvi, any thoughts on again, Chosson Kallah teachers and things that they can do? Again, you don't want to scare them too much. It's just like talking to kids about protecting their bodies. You want the kids to live a happy childhood, but you want them to also be on guard. And I guess the same, really, it's the same thing. It's just you're talking to adults or almost adults that are getting married and trying to give them a similar message of what's on the bell curve of normalcy and what is not, and to I guess to be aware of your feelings and to trust your gut on a certain level and to be able to reach out. So yeah, I mean that can be tricky. I mean, you obviously want to give them the information without scaring them half to death if they decide they don't want to go through with it.
So it's interesting. It goes back to what I was mentioning before. Many times our reactions to hearing about trauma or to hearing about difficulties reverts back to our own feelings, our own inner feelings. Sometimes we're afraid to have conversations with people that we need to have. We need to be open to having those conversations, even if they're difficult. So a Chosson Kallah teacher who may be having a conversation and a flag may be shared, it might be difficult to talk about it, but it might be far more difficult not to.
Right. There, we sent around on our chat preparing for this an article in Mishpacha magazine, which was a letter from a girl, dear Kallah teacher, and how many years down the road, we're just trying to put our family back together because of domestic abuse. And when I told you about this, you said, well, you're nervous. Well, everybody's nervous, and yes, and sometimes you're nervous because everybody's nervous, and sometimes you're nervous because something has happened and it's a bigger issue. Again, being able to determine which is which obviously is the trick. But just saying, hey, it's just nerves, don't worry about it, is not necessary. It can really do a lot of harm.
And I just want to, if I may, Rabbi, just talk about that a second. Sure. It goes back to even the cycle that we're talking about of avoiding that cycle of, no, it's okay, don't worry about it, don't trust your gut. While if we go back to, well, let me hear more, share with me more, we're opening up that communication and setting setting the tone for future conversations. So I don't need to be concerned. I don't need to be as concerned about sharing intimate details because the Chosson teacher, the Kallah teacher told me that I can. They told me that it's okay to share more. So now I have the ability to share more moving forward. I'm not as afraid.
Right. I think, sometimes if we read Sipurei Hasidim too much, we end up feeling like, well, the person has a problem, just give the answer and be done with it. And that doesn't necessarily work unless you're, Mendel Rimanov or something like that. But, if you're just Pinney Herman from Raleigh, there might be a different way to go with that. And just open, like you said, and have and open that door. Don't shut the person down. Allow them to express their feelings. Tell me more, and that can really give you a much bigger picture, and it might help you be able to determine, what, this is a big deal, or maybe it's not such a big deal. There was and I think that is something which in my humble opinion, not knowing much about domestic abuse, but I think if that's something that everybody walks away with tonight, I think that would make this entire session well worth it. I think that is really, really key. A question that came in: what if the husband warns his wife not to ask any Rav but himself? DEFCON 5. I mean, this is not working. Not working. You have a misspelling. Not good.
That is a tough question. It's a very tough question. I mean, if he's warned, just the wording of he warns his wife not to ask any Rav, that in itself suggests that there's a significant degree of intimidation and coercion, coercive control going on over there. That's actually one of the textbook cases of religious abuse, using a person's religious sensitivities to exert control. I am now the religious authority. You will not, you will not have anyone else other than me. That's a textbook case. As we said before about that one case of physical abuse, I would be very surprised if that's the only instant in which he's exerting control. I'd be very surprised. There could be that's the one that stands out. Could be for whatever reason that's the one that kind of like breaks the window, so to speak. But odds are there are other things going on as well. So if the question is that a case of abuse, I would say most probably yes. I don't like giving straight answers without context, but just from what we're seeing here, yeah, that's a case a case of abuse.
Yeah.
And there's probably more going on, depending on what the details, like depending on what the person wants to happen. It's a whole conversation in and of itself.
Yeshaya, you know what my response would be?
Tell me more. There you go.
Tell me more.
Yes, there you go. Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, we could really continue this,
absolutely.
More and more, on and on. But what I would like to do is just to end by each of you describing your organization. I know that Ohel and Shalom Task Force work hand in hand and really complement each other in many ways. And it's wonderful to see separate organizations working together and really for the common good. And so Yeshaya Kraus to both of you and your organizations for really, doing it mamish l'shma, mamish because that's what needs to be done. And we all know how vital this work is. So Tzvi, if you would like to start and just sort of describe some of the things that Ohel provides as a resource that Rabbanim and other first supporters can use and can direct people to.
So to go to the services that we provide, Ohel has regular groups, both psychosocial groups and support groups for individuals who are suffering through domestic abuse. In addition to that, we supported counseling for individuals who are suffering through domestic abuse. And we also do various events throughout the year for survivors. And lastly, we do have a safe dwelling program, which means a shelter program, a kosher Shomer Shabbos program. The safe dwelling program is located, the location is not shared. Most people, even within our organization, are not aware of its location. So we're very careful about that security for the safety of the individuals and their children.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that's really incredible. Are how many other kosher organizations have the safe dwelling program?
Not aware of any others. There are other programs that do their best to be culturally sensitive, but in regard to being a Jewish Orthodox, run by a Jewish Orthodox organization, I don't know of any on this coast, at least.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so that's amazing. That's amazing. All right, Yeshaya.
Yeah. So
tell us about Shalom Task Force.
Yeah. So Shalom Task Force. There are three major parts to what Shalom Task Force does. One, which I referenced before, is the hotline. And it's not just phone either. We are able to be reached by chat, by WhatsApp. We have an online portal on our website as well, where you can contact one of our advocates who can just give you that kind of an open space to kind of piece together whatever's going on. And we get a very wide range of people who call in. Just like we from the different conversations we've been able to pick up, sometimes the person has shared sometimes their locations, the demographic, whatever it is, and we get calls from all different stripes of the Orthodox the Frum community, Hasidish, modern, yeshivish, not yeshivish, whatever it's, we get from everybody, all different ages, men, women. We get calls from people calling in about friends, about family members, being concerned, how do I best support this person? We get calls from Rabbanim who are calling and asking for referrals, or they're worried about a particular situation, and they call in hoping to be able to kind of gather their thoughts. So we get a lot of different calls from a lot of different people in a lot of different roles. It's an anonymous place, so we only know whatever information the person calling in is willing to share. And Baruch Hashem, we've been able to help a lot of people, whether it's just a matter of giving them resources or a matter of even just living and listening to them, even just a matter of listening to them. I believe, if I remember correctly, since the hotline has started, we've fielded, I believe, 26,000 calls, something along those lines. Wow. And this is over the course of, I think, 25 years. But it's a lot, and we've been able to give that service to people. We have a legal department as well, which is able to give a consultation or legal advice and a limited representation as well to people in New York State, whether it's in civil court, sometimes in criminal courts, dealing with domestic violence situations. And we have the education department, which is my department. And we go around doing presentations very much like this one, whether it's in high schools, post-high school settings, community settings such as this, and working with different organizations to promote healthy relationships, to promote domestic abuse awareness, and to try to empower people and to help people to understand that no matter what their background might be, they deserve to have a good and healthy and safe relationship, which for some people coming out of whatever their background might have been, whether they've observed abuse at home, or whatever their frame of reference is, it can be a real eye-opener. Like, oh, I don't have to repeat that. I can kind of change the course. I can write my own book. You know, when we're talking about reading between the lines, I can change the story. So that's an important thing. One thing that I think is just important to notice is that, as we said before, when people call in, one of the things that they're used to is being told what to do. They're used to being given directions, and they're used to not being able to make their own decisions. We do not push any agenda. We feel that it's of primary importance to not push any agenda when people are calling in and discussing their situation. We will never advise, oh, okay, you should do this or you should do that. As difficult as it might be, and even sometimes people will say, should I do this or should I do that? We can say, listen, these are the options, and we can help you to kind of weigh the benefits, the pros and cons of each side, but you have to make that decision for yourself. We will not compound the loss of autonomy that you've already suffered by telling you what decision to make. And it goes, and that's true whether it's a matter of, maybe the more mundane, the smaller decisions that the person might have to make. And certainly in terms of the bigger decisions, like such as divorce, we would never tell a person calling in, okay, it sounds like you should call it off, throw in the towel. We never advise anyone to do anything at all against their wishes. And we never push for any particular agenda, certainly not one of that nature. I think that's just an important thing to put out there.
All right. Well, thank you both for your time and your expertise and enlightening us on this. It's an issue that's been in our world for way too long. Much of it in silence. And the fact that we are able to have these open discussions, the fact that people are tuning in and are beginning to educate themselves about this is very heartening. And hopefully, we will continue to spread that. I wish both of you, your organizations, should be B'Hatzlacha Rabba. And also those of you who are tuning in, just to let you know that there are more evenings that are being planned. Please stay tuned. Please make sure that we can advertise, that we can let you know when the next event is going to be, when the next session is going to be, and look forward to your participation. Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni, and Be'ez Hashem, through all of the hard work of your organizations and all the rabbanim and teachers and mashpiyim and askonim that are on this chat. It should just be a month filled with simcha, and we should continue that simcha into the rest of the year for a long, long time until Bias Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mehera v'yameinu mamash. Thank you again. Kol Tuv.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kol Tuv. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Kol Tuv.
All right.